Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with me, the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, as always, don't hold that against me. Coming at you today with coronavirus talk. Now we're gonna cover some of the basics of coronavirus as put out by the CDC. I am not going to offer any kind of narrative or editorial on the coronavirus itself, other than to just share the data that the CDC is putting out, just to sort of calibrate everybody. I still encounter folks on a pretty regular basis who don't seem calibrated to the realities of the coronavirus. And at this point, the focus should be less on worrying about whether or not you catch it, depending on what age group you're in, but rather just not being another source of spreading it to people who are in higher risk factors. So we're gonna talk about those numbers, but I also want to take some time to talk to each of you about what should you be thinking if you're a buyer, what should you be thinking if you're a seller, and what should you be thinking if you're an investor. Now, this is going to affect my investors who already own properties most dramatically. We are seeing, you can't evict people in most places now. So if someone's not paying, and frankly, I don't think that as a real estate investor or as a person with tenants, your go-to should be, let's evict them, right? This is something we all have to try and weather, and I understand that we need to calibrate the world to the idea that the vast majority of folks who own rental properties are not giant, wealthy, billion-dollar companies. I know I did a show just a few days ago where we were talking about billion-dollar companies that own tons of real estate, but most of the folks who rent out homes, it's a mom and pop kind of a thing. A huge number of them are folks who simply inherited a house from a relative, or when they bought their first home, they didn't sell it when they when they moved up, right? Maybe their family grew. We're not talking about people who are making tens of thousands of dollars a week on real estate. We're talking about, or even a month, we're just talking about people who are making a little extra income by renting out a property. So we need to sort of expand on what are the options that could potentially be available to investors who currently hold property. All right. So the first thing I want to do is let's just look at the science as it relates to the coronavirus. Right now, and you can see on the screen, if just as a note to folks who've been consuming my podcast for 13 years, I am now doing a video version of the podcast as I record the podcast. So some of you are watching this right now on YouTube as a video. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You're probably a new person to the show. There are other folks who've been doing this for 13 years through the podcast, listening in their car or wherever is convenient. But I want to let my podcast listeners know that it is now available as a video on YouTube, and I'm doing it on a regular basis. So it's not just one-offs. So feel free to check out the show there. All right. So let's get into it. Let's first talk about the reality on the ground of the COVID-19 coronavirus. First of all, let me just tell people that you can to stop avoiding buying Corona beer. That's just goofy. So let's agree to not do that because it just doesn't make any sense. All right, so you can see the breakdown here: age group, years, number of cases on this chart. Now remember, this is directly from CDC. You can see the link at the top of the page. And 0 to 19 years old, case fatality, 0. 20 to 44, case fatality, 0.1 to 0.2%. So if you're under 44, in terms of you worrying about your own health, statistically, you have far less than a 1% chance that this is something that's gonna cost you your life. And that's the important takeaway. But the other folks, and maybe we should be saying this to all of the spring breakers in Florida right now, I'm less interested in whether or not you get this. The odds of this hurting you are very low. But what you're doing is the ultimate act of selfishness, because while you won't get it, you could bring it back to wherever you've come from, wherever you're spring breaking from, and give it to your mother, your grandparents, your friend who didn't go on spring break, who then gives it to the parents or grandparents, or you come home and visit with mom and dad and give it to your brother or sister who has asthma or some other respiratory issue that is a risk factor for this. So let's think broadly, right? Let's try not to screw up everybody that we meet or the people that they love at home who are in the higher risk factors. Because as we can see from this chart, the number jumps pretty dramatically. So the 45 to 54, which is my group, is still under 1%. It's 0.5 to 0.08 or 0.8. So still not a huge risk factor. If I was worried about whether something was going to happen 1% of the time, I'd be paralyzed most of my life. There are much higher probabilities of other things killing you with a greater chance than 0.8. So that's not something that you should lose sleep over. From 55 to 64, it jumps to a worst case scenario of 2.6% of the folks who get the cases, resulting in a fatality. Then from 65 to 74, we start to see it go to a worst case scenario of 4.9%, so just short of 5% mortality. And then things start to go crazy. So this is the age groups where we as just people, just folks walking around, need to be aware that if we are potentially carrying anything, if we have the sniffles, a headache, a dry rash, assume you've got it and don't go visiting with your 78-year-old grandmother. Because if she gets it, she has up to a 10.5% chance of this resulting in a fatality. Over 85, worst case scenario, 27.3% chance of a fatality. And that's pneumonia and all kinds of things that can come along with that. So let's be responsible, not because we're worried about our own health predominantly, right? The majority of the population is not in a high risk group for this. Let's be responsible because we don't want to hurt other people. Right? So that's the philosophy I'm trying to take away from this. The other thing to I think be aware of is comparing this to just the general influenza, right? And I just want to put this out there just so that you're seeing the stats. Now this is the deaths, right, from on all the various flu seasons in a year, right? So and I get that it's not wrong to be publicizing something that's a health risk. But what sometimes confuses me is why the 2018 to 19, the fact that we had, up to 52,000, the estimate was 34,000 people died of influenza last year. The year before that, 61,000. Year before that, 38,000. These are estimates. In the 2016 to 17 flu season, 38,000 people died. 2014 to 15, 51,000 people died. So in terms of again, grokking this, you're still not in a place where you should be more worried than in previous infections. Now, granted, the mortality rates are much higher here. So the idea of the mortality rates are lower, with these. So the idea of preventing folks from getting it in the broader population is still good because we want to still keep that number lower, right? We don't want 38,000 people or 60,000 people to die. And if a huge number of people get it, obviously, since we're talking about percentages, the more people who get it, the more the probability that number balloons, right? The number of fatalities. So anyway, that's the rundown I wanted to give to everyone as it relates to COVID-19. This data is not hard to find. This is stuff that's just right up there on the CDC. I continue today to see headlines and news stories that really seem to want to get people freaked out. And then on the other side, right, the response side, the biggest thing I fear about this is less the influenza itself or the COVID-19 itself. What I tend to fear most are people's reactions to it. Are you responding rationally? And when you see people beating each other up over rolls of toilet paper, I mean, come on, folks, we need to step back a bit. Now, on that subject, because what real estate show shouldn't talk about toilet paper? I went ahead just to see what would happen, right? I went onto Amazon, figuring maybe I don't want to go to Costco, I don't want to go to Safeway to see if I can track down toilet paper. I thought I'd order some off of Amazon. And it was like day trading on Amazon. If you say you go in every hour and you'd see what you could find. And sure enough, eventually at some point during the day, over the course of me checking every hour or so. And don't panic. Just to let you know, White Lawn Sons is fully stocked on toilet paper. We're A-okay. Everything's fine. But I wanted to order it and see what would happen. And the order, it finally came up where I could actually order it. But it was telling me it wasn't going to come for 4 weeks. This was Wednesday, just this last Wednesday. So at kind of the height of this craziness, within 24 hours, I got an update from Amazon that instead of it taking 4 weeks for it to arrive, it would be here this weekend. So it went from 4 weeks to 4 days, 3 days. The point I'm trying to make is the only reason we are having any issues with stuff on shelves is overbuying. The supply chain for all the things that matter most to us, which apparently starts with toilet paper. Why isn't it other things? In any event, so all of the other things are coming. They are there, right? It's just the fact that folks bought a ton to shove in their shelves that we're having a supply problem. And the supply chain's full. I've actually talked to the folks at Safeway, and they're like, yeah, no, there's no problem. We're able to supply at the same levels we've always been able to supply, but now what we're doing is increasing what we're bringing in. So it's all going to be there, right? I strongly suggest you just get yourself set and do your thing. And if worse comes to worse, if you're in Morgan Hill, just check out my Instagram and you'll find places for the greatest burritos in town, and make that your meal. Okay, so let's start talking about this situation we find ourselves in real estate. I think I'll start with investors because that's the greatest. Well, no, everybody's getting impacted hard. This is psychologically a huge impact on folks who are really wanting to avoid any exposure, and I'm totally down with that. But let's go ahead and talk about our investors first. And I'm going to first start with folks who own property. The reality is that you are going to have people who cannot pay their rent. And your first instinct during this time should not be to evict these folks. And whether it is or isn't really relevant because you can't. All the eviction courts are not hearing any cases. It's not going to happen for you. So what you need to do is first, everyone needs to understand, not just landlords, not just tenants, that the rent needs to be paid. And it's just a question of how it gets paid. This is not an issue of heartlessness. As somebody who owns investment property, and I own the worst kind of property to own in a situation like this, I own vacation property. So it's not even a question of having a lease over the course of a year with a tenant. In my case, it's literally folks, as long as they're doing it 30 days ahead of time, they can go onto a website and click cancel and they just get their money back, right? So in my situation, I just need to have enough money to survive in case I don't get rentals. Now, in my case, I always maintain at least 2 months worth of money in the account to cover the vacation property. Just for cases exactly like this, if there's a hurricane, then my place is in Hawaii, so my concerns were really more oriented towards natural disaster kind of stuff rather than disease kind of stuff. But in my case, I've just banked some money. If you have not banked any money, you're going to have to look at your options to figure out what's going on. Now, I know a lot of mortgage organizations. The mortgage organization that I currently have my mortgage on my vacation property actually sent me an email saying they were going to come up with plans for you to potentially not pay the mortgage when it was due, have sort of a process for you to defer your payment. But notice I use the word defer, not forgive. So you as a landlord, first, I think that the first step is to think about what you want to do. And I think there's layers to it. I think the first layer is to talk with your tenant and assess what their situation is. Make sure they understand that the rent still needs to get paid, but we can come up with a plan that makes it possible for everybody to get what they need, right? So number one, yeah, it's not a you don't pay the rent. It's a we'll figure out a way to make this bearable for you. And the first thing could be, would they be willing to pay the rent on a credit card or something else, which may mean that you as a landlord need to embrace a system that allows you to accept payments on a credit card. Another option is to find out how much they can pay towards the rent. let's say, I don't know, you can pay 25% of the rent, 50% of the rent, 10% of the rent, whatever. Any amount is good. What I would suggest you then do then is then come up with a month by month. Now, I don't want you to say a blanket thing over a certain period of time. There's no way to know how long this is going to take to resolve itself. It could be a month, it could be 2 months. But I think that if you're an investor who owns a piece of rental property, you need to come up with a plan on how, whether the person can pay 0% of the rent or 95% of the rent. You then come up with a plan where once this all subsides and everything starts to go back to normal, there is a built-in plan for repaying the unpaid rent. So how would you manage that? It's actually not that complicated. You can actually Google online ways to do deferred rent payments, and you can say, all right, well, this month your rent is normally, $500 or $2,000 if you're in my area, and you can pay me $500. So we'll take that $1,500, and not next month, but the following month, we'll amortize that $1,500 out over the course of, say, 10 months. So it's an extra. So your rent goes up $150 for 10 months after that period of time, or maybe it could be 12 months, whatever you want to do, 20 months. But come up with a plan that you're comfortable with and that your tenant is comfortable with, and revisit on a monthly basis. Now, it's going to stink if this goes on much longer and that amount that needs to be repaid continues to go up. But you need to come up with a plan, and particularly since if you've done a good job as a landlord, you probably have a good tenant in there, somebody who wants to pay their rent and does a great job of taking care of the property. So you'll need to figure out a reasonable plan that will work for you. But as of right now, today, as I make this show, the odds are that in your area, eviction is not an option. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think even if the government was taking a standpoint of, hey, reality is what reality is, and you owe this rent. If you don't own it, you need to get out of that person's property. I think you, as someone who is going through the real estate world, trying to offer a good home to people, you need to be able to empathize with these folks and come up with a genuine and honest plan to help them get beyond it. So I don't think as an investor you should be rooting for the idea of getting a different renter in there. I think that you should be working cooperatively and compassionately with your renters. This isn't their fault. They didn't create the COVID, but it's not your fault either. So you need to get what has been agreed on, but you might have to come up with terms and conditions that allow it to be something that's stretched out over a period of time. So that's my suggestion to those folks. For folks who are looking to invest right now, so we'll just get investors completely out of the way. My suggestion is that this is actually, if you're not in the high-risk age groups, right, and I scrolled away from them. Where are they? There they are. If you're not in the high-risk age groups and you're being disciplined in how you're doing stuff, and given what is out there, you wouldn't need to expose yourself to a lot of folks, right? You theoretically could do this and never expose yourself to anybody other than one real estate agent. The number of buyers that are out there poking around is absolutely down. My marketing to buyers is generating far fewer contacts than it's a 2-week shift. If we were talking 2 weeks ago, I was still seeing tons of buyers calling me about all kinds of properties. Over the last week, that's completely changed. So from a completely just supply and demand and who you're having to compete with to get your hands on properties, it's an amazing time for you to potentially go out and find a great property. A lot of folks are concerned the stock market is down. One thing to understand, though, is that the stock market is not listed as a primary reason why most buyers step away from buying. There was an interesting article last week about that, but this could be an opportunity for you to buy in a normally crowded market in such a way that where it's not crowded at all. So keep that in mind as an investor. There's potentially some deals to be had for investors. Next, I want to talk to sellers. I have seen a concerning trend when I have talked to a variety of folks who have their homes listed right now. Now, some sellers have taken their homes off the market. They just don't want to have to deal with it. Virtually all, I have not seen, as of yesterday, all open houses are canceled in the areas that I serve. I keep a running list of what, in fact, if you want to see what open houses are open, the front page of my website at soldbyrobert.com, one of the things I display is upcoming open houses, and there's none. So we can take from that all that level of marketing is gone, which is fine. But so here's what I'm going to suggest to folks. It has never been more important to leverage the available technology to get your property in front of people. And what needs to happen is you need to have the highest volume of eyeballs on your property as a seller. So I'm talking now to sellers and to their agents, because I am seeing some disturbing things where realtors are telling their clients, their seller clients, and talking them into doing pocket listings. Now, we've talked about pocket listings before. A pocket listing is one where your home can only be bought and sold by the same brokerage, meaning they'll represent both parties. It's called double ending. Dual agency is usually the legal term that's used. And it is legal in California, but in my opinion, not ethical. It does the only person, there is a very slim percentage of transactions out there where dual agency makes sense. A couple I've done over the course of the last however many years, I've been doing this since 1988, where both parties come to you with an agreement already in mind about the terms and conditions of the purchase, and they just want someone to shepherd the process through the usual protections. That's one. Divorces are an example, or I used to be very active in a retirement community in Scotts Valley, and oftentimes folks would just sell to a friend and they'd decide on a price and everything would be set. Great. That's a great way for them to save some money. It's a great way for you to provide some security in a transaction. Fantastic. Those are times when dual agency can potentially make sense. However, I have come across now several sellers who were stunned to discover that their homes were not listed in the MLS. And you don't get your home. When you do a pocket listing, they don't list your home in the MLS. They'll list your home on Zillow or on some of the other portals, but they're not cooperating with other agents. So in other words, they're only looking at their own resources to bring in a buyer. Given the current scenario we're in, that is the only person who benefits from that is the real estate agent and the brokerage that they work for. It is the worst possible thing that could be happening with you as a seller. Remember, we are in a scenario now where the number of buyers has substantially dropped. Also, the number of sellers has dropped quite a bit, but there are still sellers out there who must sell. They don't have the time to wait for this to resolve itself. They need to be on the market right now. Now, if you can be off the market right now, I suggest you do that. I don't think this is the time to have your house marketed. However, if you must, the first thing you must resist is any real estate agent who pushes for you to do a pocket listing. And I don't care if they tell you, hey, if we do a pocket listing, we'll be able to only take a 2% commission or a 3% commission or a 4% commission. What I'm going to tell you is that the amount of money you'll lose because you're letting them do that will overcome whatever you think you're saving based on their lowered commission that they're going to take. And why do they take a lower commission? Because it's all going to stay with the same agent or the same brokerage firm, right? It's still dual agency if you're doing two human beings that work for the same brokerage. But the goal here is to just keep all the money within the same company. So now why is it something you don't want to do? Well, because you're not on the MLS, right? Which means you're not in Realtor.com, which is still one of the top 3 sites visited and is basically, and even if we don't want to talk about the website, if we just want to talk about the MLS, the number one source is other real estate agents. If you want to get eyeballs on your property, that's the way to do it. So by not putting it on the MLS, by trying to keep it as a pocket listing where only your company will find the buyer, you're absolutely hobbling the effort for your property to get sold if you agree to that with a listing agent. Now, this should be very clearly specified on your listing agreement. If it is specified as a pocket listing, you need to have a chat immediately, and you need to go to Realtor.com and see if your property shows up. Because if it doesn't, things need to change immediately. Now, here's the other side of the coin. People aren't going to come to your open houses, and they might still look online. But what needs to happen is your real estate agent needs to be implementing new and innovative ways. There's an awful lot of agents out there who do the throw it on the wall and stick approach, or a standard batch of marketing things that are not going to get you the maximum views that you need on your property. You need something with very dynamic tours. You need, in fact, virtual open houses should be happening. You should have your agent in your property for some number of hours on a Saturday or a Sunday, live streaming that open house to Facebook. There's no reason not to, right? Facebook facilitates it. YouTube facilitates it. So these are things that should be happening, and they should be entertaining live questions from folks who are watching. They should be marketing that this is going to happen. Everything can be virtual right up until they find somebody who's going to find that property. But the idea of you not having your home listed in the MLS right now is frankly one of the dumbest things you could possibly do. Very smart for your agent and your agent's brokerage, not very smart for you. All right, so that's something else. Buyers. I understand that you are concerned. Given what we've already talked about in terms of the highest risk age groups, if you don't fall into a high-risk age group, I don't think you should let this particular situation stop you from continuing to shop. I think that you can get a better deal because there's less competition for existing listings. And it's an opportunity potentially for you to get into a property for lower than what you would normally be experiencing at this time of year. Now, remember, it was just a month ago where I was sharing data about how crazy this market was becoming. Supply was not growing, and demand was going way up. The amount of homes that were getting taken off the market was ridiculous. So sales were going like gangbusters. I think we'll see at the end of the next month, because remember, everything lags by about a month. So we still tend to see data that reflects a strong market, but the reality on the ground is things have ground to a halt just within the last week or so. But that spells an opportunity for buyers. If you have folks who still have their home on the market during this period of time, you can take that as a hint that those folks really need to get their home sold. So this is also an opportunity for you as a buyer, a window of time where you are likely more in the driver's seat than buyers have been for a very long time. So I'm going to suggest a very aggressive online approach. You should have an agent who is working with you to be as innovative as possible. If you don't want to go out and be in other people's homes or whatever else, you can have that agent go and do the exact same thing that I just suggested and live stream it to you. Talk to you live, do FaceTime, whatever, and be able to show them what the house looks like. Have your agent bird dog this stuff for you and go out there and get those things going on. And I understand the idea of wanting to quarantine and not go out and do all these things. And there's no reason you'd need to violate a quarantine given all the tools that are currently available to be able to view homes. Okay. I really hope that this has been helpful. There's a lot of information going around that's not good. I think the CDC information I just shared with you can kind of calibrate you to where the risks really are and how the vast majority of the population just needs to be considerate of the members of the population that are at a higher risk to this, and realize that instead of going to spring break, instead of going out and defying or pushing away the idea of distancing and all these other things, just realize, hey, you know what? It's not about you. It's about the other person. It's about the person who's either got a medical condition or who's in a higher risk age group. So let's just watch out for each other, right? It's as simple as that. Now, as usual, the goal here is to offer you far more in information than I take up in your time. Hopefully we've achieved that today. If you'd like to reach out to me, feel free to head over to my website, www.soldbyrobert.com, or the show site at www.therebelbroker.com, just for the podcast / YouTube show, just for the podcast. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.